You have three basic towns in the Lewiston area. You have Lewiston, which is on the Idaho side. You have Clarkson, which is on the Washington side. A bridge separates us. And then Soton, Washington, which is a small town just south of Clarkston. They're just a nice place to have a family, to grow up and to work.
It's a relatively small town, oriented heavily around the mill, heavily outdoors oriented. Everybody here whitewater rafts, hunts, fishes. Education is a strong point. We have colleges and universities within 35 miles, 2 here in the valley itself. It's a good place to live. It's a relatively safe community. I think that when Christina White disappeared in '79 was the first time that I ever would have said my kids couldn't throw their sleeping bags out in the backyard and spend the night, and I'd not worry about it.
Kristina was a 12-year-old girl that was more of a tomboy. She liked the woods and hunting and fishing and being outdoors and doing all the outdoors things.
She was very involved in church. In fact, when she disappeared, she had only 2 weeks left to go before she was confirmed in the church. And she was a little hyperactive, I would call her. When she was 2 years old, she got up on the counter and she'd watch me make cookies so often. She put together a batch of cookies that we just finished and that we baked them in the oven.
She was a good little artist. She was quite a craftsman. She made me a belt buckle and she made me some stone necklaces. This was Chrissy painted for me, and she gave it to me for Christmas in 1978, 79, and that was the last Christmas that she had with me.
It was during the Asotin County Fair, and we had been down and watched the parade. It was about noonish, I guess, when we went over, and she had ridden her bike to town and I was afoot. I had a neighbor that came by and picked my smallest daughter up. We got in the car with her, said goodbye to Chris. I guess I must have chatted there for a moment with somebody else, because when we drove by the house on the corner at 2nd Street where her friend lived, she was on the porch and she waved goodbye. And that was the last time I saw her. That was one of the first hot days of the year, and she's subject to heat. She called from inside the house, and nobody was home. She said that she was having a problem, and I told her just to get a towel out of the bathroom and get it wet, and go sit down in the shade and put the towel around her neck until she got to feeling better. And I said, if you don't feel better, I said, just walk down to the end of the road, because we're just a block and a half down. I could see the intersection if she walked on 2nd. And that I'd walk down and help her come up the hill. And I never did hear anything, so I just assumed that she was off enjoying the rest of the fair and that things were good. Then it got to be 5 o'clock and then 6 o'clock. Nobody heard anything from her, and from there on we started inquiring, and we never were successful in finding anybody that had seen her.
The carnival was still going when I got there Sunday morning. I tried to get the sheriff's department to go down there and search the trailers and the campers and all of that. They would not do it. Law enforcement would do absolutely nothing as far as looking for her. Jim Pope, a local person that had a helicopter, he flew me Sunday and Monday all over the area. We looked for her and we didn't find anything, her or the bicycle. The sheriff at the time, he wouldn't do anything for at least 3 days after she was missing. And the only thing he did in those 3 days was require that Betty and I go in for a test to see if you're telling the truth. We did, and of course we all passed it. After the carnival left town, I followed it down to the Tri-Cities is where it went, and hung out there for 3 days and just nosed around to see if if there was any sign of her around there, if somebody had her, and didn't have any luck with that.
Kristin was a short, stocky little gal. She was not 5 foot, but she says, I'm 4 foot 11 3/4 inches. I think that was one of her main objects of being 5 foot, but she never was. And a very caring person. When she was younger, she was the mother to the younger kids, I know that. She always told me, she says, I'll never have any children, because she says, I've got my own kids. Kristin was studying journalism at the time, and the day she disappeared, as far as I know, she was taken up to Moscow the night before and dropped off by a friend. She was going to ride her bicycle down from Moscow the next morning to Lewiston, being a bicycle enthusiast, and she had just had that bicycle repainted and everything, and that's when she disappeared that day. She was spotted on the hill before going down into Lewiston, and that's the last anybody had ever really thought that they had recognized this girl on a bicycle, which was Kristin.
There was a person who came forward, said he had seen a brown Ford van with a single man talking to a young woman right at the Latah County, Nez Perce County line on Highway 95. It was a toss-up whether it be Latah County or Nez Perce County. Sheriff Mike Getz stepped up to the plate. He was from Latah County, and he said, we'll undertake the investigation. Many agencies were involved: the Lewiston Police Department, Clarkston Police Department, Stoughton County Sheriff's Office in Washington, Latah County, Nez Perce County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI, State Police.
Jurisdictional issues are huge, especially between Lewiston and the state of Washington, because you have to determine which agency's in charge of the investigation, because that determines where the evidence goes to, whether it goes to a Washington lab or an Idaho lab. Who's going to be financially responsible for the cost of this investigation? A lot of times the FBI person would think that that is interstate and they would just take over, but where it's a missing person, they usually don't get involved until it's determined that it actually is a homicide.
I don't know how to tell you this, really. I can't recall who discovered Kristin, or I do recall who discovered Kristin. It was some fisherman in the Snake River. In black plastic bags. Basically butchered.
The sheriff boats were out on the river for a couple of days collecting her remains, and everybody was really scared because of the circumstances of her remains being found in these trash bags, because nobody knew who the killer was or if somebody was going to be next. I think the whole valley was scared.
Kristina was kind of an outgoing girl. She was on cheer dancers when she was in high school, and as she went on to college, she was quite busy with her painting, and she always had a very strong love for animals. One of the things that she kind of wanted to do was perhaps become a veterinarian after she got out of school. Brandy was my stepdaughter, and she was kind of an outgoing person also. She was always pretty much willing to help anybody.
When Harold and I met, Jackie was 9 or 10 and Christy was like 11 or 12. I taught both the girls to cook, sew, drive, of course, and I helped them with their schoolwork. We did a lot of other things too, shopping, and sometimes we would just go in the kitchen and bake just because we wanted to. Just all kinds of things. When we were all together, we had so much fun. We enjoyed life together. And I don't remember any fighting between the kids, which is really hard to say about families, especially step families. Both the girls, Jackie and Christy, were very well behaved. They were both raised, I'm not going to say real strict, but they were taught right from wrong. They were taught responsibility. Neither one of them, in the whole time they were growing up, got in trouble with the police, did drugs. Neither one of them smoked, which of course Harold and I did. Neither one of them did. They, pretty upstanding. Both of them knew what they wanted to do. And I enjoyed them a lot.
We did see each other as small children, and finally got to meet when we were roughly around 12, 13 years old. Went up to Boise, Idaho, and from there took a road trip. And we traveled across country, and we bonded, and we talked about girl things because we were very close in age, more so than my own sister. And, the girly stuff that, at that age, it's an awful age. Pimples, boys, periods, it's awful. So we talked about that and kind of bonded. And from there, when I went back home, we sort of lost touch. I remember when Christina Nelson and Brandy Miller went missing, because I went to school with Christina Nelson and I knew her, and she just quit coming to school. That was a shock because Christina was so into her education and nobody knew what happened. In the classroom, she was a lot of fun. She was giggly and very smart. I just thought she was adorable. She was tiny, she had this long, beautiful hair, and I adored the coat that she wore, and I believe it's the same one she had on when she was found.
When Christina was declared missing, I was kind of distraught, and then I found out that Brandy was also missing at the same time, and then that kind of added to the mix right there, that nobody seemed to know what or where anybody had gone, and I kind of got the impression from the police at the time that they thought, well, they were just took off on a lark and maybe run off with a couple of boys or something.
The girls were in constant touch with each other, so I didn't feel that it was a bad thing to let them come up here, to let Jackie come up here too. I really didn't. They wanted to be together. Why not? They were like sisters. Jackie didn't have a sister, so I figured that was a good substitute. And they didn't get into trouble, which I thought that they would take care of each other.
Brandy would sometimes come up to Christy's apartment, and they would spend the night, which probably was the case at the time that they disappeared.
Willie Russell and I were first assigned to the case from the initial report of 2 missing girls. And we started conducting interviews and searches of the areas, to establish if the girls were actually missing or what the status of them were. Willie and I walked the area from each girl's apartment back and forth looking for any type of physical evidence of them. We walked from their apartments to the Civic Theater. From the Civic Theater going toward where the Red Baron used to be, which was at 8th Street, then over toward the grocery store where they supposedly went that evening.
Our initial report was that they could either be runaway or involved in some type of foul play. They had went to the Civic Theater after shopping or before shopping. It was never determined which actually transpired. But they ended up at the Civic Theater sometime during the middle of the night.
The disappearance of Brandy Miller and Christine Nelson is referred to as the Civic Theater murder case because it was the last place that they believed they were seen.
I believe I was about 14 or 15 at the time that I found the body. I got kicked out of school, so I was out collecting cans to make a few extra dollars. I went up the grade, turned my pickup around and parked it downhill to where my pickup was facing back down towards Kendrick. Got out of my pickup and I went over the guardrail and down into the bushes, went down quite a ways, almost to the tree line, and then I turned around and started coming back up. Came up quite a ways, and then had a branch knock my hat off my head, and then it rolled down the hill, and it just kept rolling and rolling and rolling. Why it didn't stop, I don't know, because of all the brush and stuff that's down there. It should have just dropped and basically fell right there. And it rolled all the way down to where there was like a grayish figure there. I figured it was a deer skull. I crawled down and grabbed my hat, and I reached down to pick up the skull, which I thought was a deer skull, but when I picked it up, I noticed it wasn't a deer skull, it was a human skull.
When the bodies of Nelson and Miller were found, they were found approximately 17, 18 months after they disappeared. The bodies were in advanced decomposed situation. Mostly it was skeletal remains with some flesh and skin. There were some clothing and garments found, They were sent to the FBI laboratory and tested and searched for possible evidence. After they were found, we went in and cordoned off the area with the Latah County Search and Rescue, and myself and another officer did the crime scene search, or the site where the bodies were found. And then we did we spent 2 days on that, 2.5 days, and then we did a search of that whole hillside, about a mile square around that area, looking for any other evidence.
When we first found out that the bodies were located by Latah County, we were notified by Vanessa Gerwels of Clue TV at that time. She called our office and asked if we heard anything, and we said no, we hadn't. We hadn't been told anything by Latah County. Dwayne Naylor and I drove up on the Kendrick grade to see what was going on. When we got there, we never saw anyone other than a news reporter who was taking photographs of the area. Dwayne and I then drove to the Moscow Sheriff's Office and wanted some information as to what was found and why they had not contacted us. We put out an all points bulletin all over. Even though it was after a year, with the local agency, we felt, especially with the clothes description that we had of the girls last wearing when they disappeared, and some of the clothing that was located at their recovery site, why Latah hadn't contacted us.
Every night I prayed and prayed that, they'd be found, that they'd be okay, that, maybe they did just take off on a lark somewhere, but that was not the case, as we know now.
Back in those days, back in the late 70s, early 80s, you're young, you think you're indestructible, you think you're never going to get hurt. And she wasn't quite as wild as myself. She had her wild side, but she pretty much kept that, to herself. I always thought, wow, I have done all this stuff and been in situations that it should have been, by all rights, me dying instead of her. And it took me back because she was such a bright, bubbly spirit, and her life just ended too soon. It really took the wind out of my sails and made me sit back and realize that we're not indestructible. And this does happen. You hear this, it never happens to our family. It happened to ours. And, yeah. Once I found out that they had found Christy, of course the first question is, who did it? Lewiston Police Department saw him entering through the side door. They happened to be patrolling by, and one of the officers had seen him go into the building itself. So there is witness to this, and it being law enforcement, that he was inside that building.
A girlfriend of Steven's had stated that the last time she had seen him was when she took him to the Civic Theater after a party they'd had one evening and dropped him off there with other things that he wanted to catch up on when he was at the theater. He did janitorial service for a while, I think, and he also painted backdrops because he was so artistic. He did a lot of that. When they first put his name and picture and talking about the disappearance, they had a picture of him that my husband objected to in the paper. He had grown a beard and long hair for a role that he was going to have in one of the the plays. I think it was Jesus Christ Superstar. And so that was the picture that was put in the paper. And at that time, it was stated that he was a suspect. It was heartbreaking when that was in black and white for everyone to read. My husband very heartily objected to the picture and to the fact that he was put as suspect when they knew nothing about him in that respect, and really hadn't looked into the personality of Steven or what he'd been doing at that time as far as we knew.
We kind of grew up together in our later grade school and teen years and whatnot. He was considerably older than I was. He lived with us after he came back from the military with my family, searching for what he was looking for. He loved schooling, he loved learning, he loved music, he loved performing, and he was a fairly good comedian. Always trying to put a smile on your face and make people happy. Steven never, ventured without letting somebody close know, if, hey, I'm gonna be gone for a couple of days, we're going here. He just wasn't one to take off and not tell anybody. So the way that my uncle had found his apartment and his belongings, checks were not cashed, house was open, keys were laying on the table, wallets there. I mean, you don't normally leave for a period of time without taking your money, your wallet, your identification, your vehicle. Vehicle was parked out in front of his apartment.
His father's just passed away a couple of months ago, but he always believed after the initial shock and the running around to try to find him, he believed that his son went into that civic theater and never came out.
I think Mr. Pearsall was deceased along with Nelson and Miller. I think the reason he's deceased is that people who try to hide or disappear usually can't do it because there's too many ties to home, there's too many ties to family, too many ties to the area, and they ultimately become discovered. Just recently, the CIA tried to hide a physicist with $5 million in their pocket, and they couldn't do it. He went home.
I was so surprised that he was a suspect opposed to, a victim in the situation. And, from the very beginning, I kind of had gathered my own thoughts that possibly he's seen an incident occur with the two girls and stepped in to try to avoid it, or possibly intervened for them and, become a victim. That was the only way. As far as him doing anything to the girls, there's no way.
Really, after a certain period of time, we didn't have a lot to go on. Once the bodies were located, about a year and a half afterwards, is where we started to really get involved more with the case. We did a lot of routine follow-up with the theater. The Civic Theater is definitely a crime scene because some of the evidence, which I can't say specifically what it was, which was found at the location where the two girls were recovered, was from the Civic Theater. We did a luminol test, which was to determine if there was any blood, that was in the location of the basement by the back door. With the luminol test, it entails having a spray material that you spray in these areas, and then you use a black light type system, and it'll make everything glow if there is blood located. But the one false problem with this is that lead paint will cause the same reaction as blood stains, and the paint in the theater at that time was lead-based paint, so we couldn't determine if there was blood or the paint. after the discovery of the two girls, there was a person who I cannot name who was in the Civic Theater that night that the girls and Steve Pearsall were there.
There was a man named Lance Voss that apparently did janitorial work at the Civic Theater. He has been a person of interest because he didn't come home that night. It was apparently, according to his wife, was the first time that had ever happened. And his claim was that he had fallen asleep and awakened the next morning, had spent the night at the Civic Theater, but hadn't heard anything.
How it goes is he said that he was at the theater. He was working with Steven Pearsall on a set, and he was there up until 9:30. Steven Pearsall left at 9 o'clock to go to a party. He claims to have slept until early morning, had gotten up and called his wife, and then went home. And I tend to question that because if my husband was gone all night and didn't call me, I'd be questioning him a lot.
Dwayne and I did do an extensive interview with him in reference to what he had heard or seen at the theater while he was there. Throughout our investigation involving this possible suspect, it was found that he was or had knowledge and known a small girl who had disappeared in Osoton County in the town of Osoton by the name of Christina White.
This individual was the last person to be seen with Christina White, and the house she made the telephone call to her mother was his house.
This house was owned by the person of interest in the Christina White disappearance at the time she disappeared. He wasn't living here at the time, but he did have access to this house. He was living at the house down this way that Christina White disappeared from, and this house sits in between where she disappeared from and where her home is further on down this way.
When we were down at the police department that night she disappeared, he was right there. He was right in my face, wanting to help. I will remember that forever. And they said, one of the police officers, I think it was Ayler, that said later, he said, that's a pretty typical thing for somebody that is involved in an abduction, for them to come in and be right there and volunteer. I remember he volunteered to go up the river, down the river, somewhere. They kind of were splitting up into groups to go out and canvass the areas, even as late as it was.
I believe the same suspect is involved with all 5 disappearances that has occurred within the valley or close proximity to the valley. Number 1 being Chris White from Osoton County. The Kristin David, he had means. His job took him from the Lewis Clark Valley to Moscow, back and forth, deliveries and pickups.
Kristin David was also loosely affiliated with the Civic Theater, and that she had at one time been employed there and was familiar with this individual.
I feel some way because of their age, and I have been told that 3 or 4 of them had worked at the theater at one time or another also. Kristin wanted to maybe go into TV production at some time in her life, and this theater, she was probably behind the scenes doing backstage work, and as far as I know, that's as far as being involved in that theater is what that I was ever told.
We did discover that he had been arrested in the state of California, that he had been seen by a witness looking into a mortuary through a window that he had a camera and a knife on him, and there was a young girl that had drowned, accidental drowning, and that she was in the mortuary. He was charged on this to our knowledge at that time for a trespassing charge.
I have talked with Lance Voss a few times. One time in particular that struck me as rather odd was I was at an acquaintance's house and I didn't know who he was, and he came up and out of the blue asked me how the investigation was going on the missing girls. I wasn't aware of all the facts of the investigation. I was just a young patrolman at the time. It was not within a real close time frame of when that occurred, and I thought that to be unusual and to start a conversation out with that question.
We did a very thorough interview of him. We did ask if he would submit to a polygraph exam. He said that he would not take it. He had retained an attorney, and the attorney said not to talk to us any further. We tried finding other options available to us. We contacted a person that was supposedly an expert in voice stress analysis, and he asked us to send him a copy of the taped interview that we had done. After a period of time, he came back and he felt that the person that we had taken our interview from had definite knowledge, of the missing people, and that there was some deception that was shown in the voice stress analysis.
We continue to look at him, and he would continue to be a suspect in these cases, but it was his right not to talk to us, and his attorney conveyed to us that he no longer wished to talk to us on this case or any case. So we did not have any more personal contact, or I did not have any more personal contact with him, because his attorney had instructed me that if I continued to try to talk to him, that he would be looking at harassment.
We've got a lot of circumstantial evidence that leads to one individual. It's just getting the, for lack of a better term, physical evidence, or something that people can put their fingers on or hold on to, that would allow the prosecution from the various jurisdictions to file criminal charges.
Christina and Jackie are both buried together. They died together, so Jackie's mother and I decided that they should be together in death also. And we have those 2 separate headstones for them. I don't know why this case has not been solved. It's been almost 30 years now, and that's an awful long time to not know or have anything concrete done.
It doesn't just stay with the immediate family. These events that happen just are passed down from mother to daughter to grandchild, and it spreads out in the family. We've had some real rifts in the family because of this. It's almost like an inheritance. Everybody fights over that, and it was like this. Everybody wanted to be the good guy in this case. They wanted to be the one that was either going to find her, or they were the one that she was running to, or it just tears families apart.
I think what's keeping the cases from being solved is you have jurisdictional areas that you got to overcome. The evidence is in one place, being controlled by somebody else. The case is old and cold, and the lack of physical and forensic evidence. We're still missing 2 bodies. So we can't actually put all 5 together and name one suspect without the forensic evidence.
Well, Dwayne and I both worked on it, together, and he and I came up with the Christina White and the Civic Theater case, being basically the same case. Dwayne felt that the David case and the Civic Theater case and Christina White case were the same, but I disagreed with him, but that's just my opinion, that was his opinion on it.
I think the Nelson Miller Pearsall White situation speaks of one situation, one method of methodology of homicide, and I think the Kristin David case is completely different, and I think it's a different person altogether.
I firmly believe that the person that was involved in the disappearance of Christy White in Asotin and the person that was involved in the 2 homicides in Lewiston, including the missing gentleman, are all linked, and I think the same suspect is involved in at least those cases, and I believe he's probably involved in some other ones.
I think there's some clues in the Kristin David case that should be looked at, gone back and researched. I don't know about the Nelson Miller case. One of the variables in the Nelson Miller case is where's Mr. Pearsall?
If we found Steven Pearsall, that would be a huge move forward in that it would remove that doubt a jury could have that Mr. Pearsall was involved in the disappearance of the 2 ladies from the Civic Theater. Again, we just believe that he was the 3rd victim.
Well, I have hopes that these cases will be solved because there are grieving parents, just other grieving relatives, and so many of them have suffered through years and years of this, and they keep finding new things all the time, so I'm thinking that it will be resolved, and I'm just sorry that my husband didn't live to see that.
Eventually this case might be solved. A hunter might discover something, somebody digging in a yard might discover something, and the same with Lewiston's missing persons that might link the common thing. When you watch on TV on the crime scene shows or CSI, how they can get everything done right away and get their lab reports back. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes it's a matter of hours to successfully complete this.
And I think at some point in time, something will come forward, somebody will come forward, or something will be found that will prove that this individual is responsible and he'll be held accountable.
Gosh, I've been retired for 15, 20 years. There's not a time that goes by when I don't think about these cases.
So you just sit there and hope for that somewhere down the line that she will surface and will be a happy lady. She was born in 1967, and so she's a young woman now if she is still alive.
It's been very stressful, and there will never be closure for any of the family members, any of the parents, until the person is apprehended and punished. I don't care how he's punished, but punished for what he did. Because when you take someone's child and they disappear and you have no idea, I don't care what age you are or what age they are, in your mind you always imagine the worst happening, nightmares. It really affects you. And I just hope that the other families can try to handle it any way they can. That's the only thing I've done. But I know it makes you alone from people.
The Civic Theater case, we've been working on it recently because of advancements in technology, we were able to get some hair samples and other items of evidence from Latah County, which we've sent to the FBI for mitochondrial DNA analysis. Within the last few months, we've also obtained DNA sample from Steven Pearsall's father, and we're able to come up with a DNA profile for Steven Pearsall. And those profiles were placed into 2 national databases so that if some remains of a deceased person are entered into that database, we might be able to come up with a match and might be able to find him. So other than those things, though, I mean, we're kind of stalled out. But as things come about, we always pick up the cases and keep going.
I always try to stay positive about it. However, it can become daunting when you look around our area and you see how vast the wilderness areas are around here, the unpopulated areas, that we've got a lot of land where someone could conceal a body and it'd be very difficult to find. So it does become overwhelming sometimes when you look around, but I still try to remain positive and hopeful that we will find an answer in these cases.
It's tough. It's very tough, yeah. The first week we were looking for her, we were out riding the hills and bouncing around in the back of the pickup looking for Kristin. And I always said, well, if we could just find her, it could be a closing. But after we did find her, or they found her, I should say, why, there was never a closing, and it can't be,
I don't know what closure do. I haven't been there yet. I don't know whether I'll feel relief or pain or sorrow or, what's closure. I haven't experienced it. So, I don't know. It'd be nice to know. It'd be nice to have a body or have an idea of what happened or have some documentation, but how I'll react to that, I don't have a clue. It's interesting to think about.
Faces in the paper, in the story of your life. Places in your memory, in the park or in the car. Names, some are the same, some are just too much the same. Shame, shame, shame on you and shame on me and this old town. Shame on this old town. Shame on this old town. Pieces move to comfort in disorganization. Reason drawing fiction into faith at every turn. Fall to call